The British Empire was never about spreading civilization. It was a survival strategy for Britain's ruling class. Look at the decadence that they had in medieval Europe. Britain is a small island with limited resources, and they had visions of grandeur. Colonialism was about wealth extraction, racial domination, and military control. There were two types of colonies, the ones that got whitened and the ones that got exploited. In settler colonies, British settlers and European settlers took over and in some places wiped out indigenous populations completely. In the best cases, the settlers claimed the land and the native populations got pushed into the background as they made the lands British and Westernism emerged. But extraction colonies were never meant to be British. This is where they stole resources and used cheap labour to control trade. When indigenous populations would resist, they massacred them in their millions. They used divide and conquer tactics and puppet leaders to maintain control. They would play mind games with populations, sometimes using them to fight their battles and sometimes crushing them themselves directly or getting them to crush the other, greasing the wheels and using local elites who could be bought cheap to divide and rule. This has kept colonies weak and dependent on the West ever since. The British didn't rely on brute force to control territories. They would manipulate existing power structures, turning tribes, religions, everybody against each other so that no one noticed what they were doing. In India, this manifested as divisions between Hindus and Muslims that led to the partition in 1947 between India and Pakistan. In the 1960s in Nigeria, they caused a civil war, and in Kenya, they would recruit African elites into their bureaucracies. This is still used today, with Western influence stirring internal conflicts in the global south. For example, before the US went into Syria under Obama, the US and Britain trained rebel groups, causing the Syrian war. And then, of course, when people flee from these countries, they meet active England, who blame it all on immigrants. Britain has always framed colonialism as a gift to the colonised people. It's something you hear in Ireland, actually. Oh, the British built our roads. They only built roads so that they could extract resources. And it was indigenous workers under brutal conditions who actually built them. They just overseen the whole thing. In 1899, British poet Rudyard Kipling wrote, "It was the duty of the white man to help the less developed people." By the 20th century, direct colonial rule was too expensive and facing too much resistance. So instead of running colonies directly, they set up economic, financial, and military systems that keep former colonies weak, trapping nations in loans, forcing them to sell their resources cheap, and privatise everything to the free markets. Any anti-Western government leaders get assassinated, overthrown. Iran, Chile, Libya. And they use NATO and military control under the guise of peacekeeping and counter-terrorism. Western media blames the victims. It says Africa is poor because of corruption, but we never talk about this. After World War II, Britain was broke and the US emerged as the dominant player, using the exact same playbook. Institutions like the UN and NATO and the IMF were set up to be neutral, but so far they've only functioned as colonial management tools. Colonialism never died, it just turned into a financial empire, a Ponzi scheme, if you will. Our world is being looted of its resources. Corporations own everything and use the American government and its military presence, funded by taxpayers. Then they call it development and foreign aid and humanitarian intervention. Humanitarian intervention, you want to talk to your own veterans. Mm-mm.